Our guest today is a musician, studio owner, producer, and of course, a great string arranger. Won't you please welcome Mr. Larry Gold. Thanks so much for being here.
It's great.
This was kind of impromptu, you with the cello. Here this morning. This is kind of what you do every morning though, right?
I play all day when I'm not working on someone's arrangement. So music is my daily bread.
How many hours a day do you practice?
I'd say minimally 2, but maybe 8 at times. You know, there was a period of about 20, 25 years when I didn't play my cello. I used to play on records, obviously, and I kept myself in great shape. But then when I opened the studio, which I think is about 25 years ago, and I started doing arranging, a couple of arrangements every week, I really didn't have the time to devote to the cello. So every time I went to play it, I felt like I was a stranger to it. So that feeling made me pretty depressed. So I sort of put it aside for a while. I mean, I would pick it up, like I picked it up, I told you before, when the Roots entered my life for a while, I went up and I would take it out every once in a while because they would like me to take it out. So, I mean, you know, I did some live performing on occasion.
Right.
Like with Jay-Z.
Right, exactly. Well, we'll get to some of these things, these notable events in your career. I wanted to start actually with a piece of music that we talked about a little bit. Now, this is an arrangement of yours for an artist named Jill Scott. And
this record was completely done in my studio.
In your studio?
Yeah.
Okay. The 2011 record that we're about to play.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So just to sort of reset, even though we have Larry playing a little bit this morning, let's hear something that he arranged for Jill Scott. The track is called Hear My Call. It's from 2011, and let's give it a listen. Okay, that was Jill Scott, Hear My Call, 2011, produced by J.R. Hudson, and string arrangements by Larry Gold. We wanted to play this song because the elements are so sparse. It's really just piano, voice, and the strings. And as an example of what you do, I guess, tell us about your approach to a piece like this.
Well, you know, strings are emotional, and this was a very emotional song, and I thought it was a good way to start. You know, I love Jill. All I can tell you is that the song still moves me to this day, and I've heard it a lot, you know, in my lifetime. It's something I actually, you know, I mean, I like it. You know, ask me a question about it, and I can maybe better answer it. You know, I do everything by feeling more than by rote. Jill was in the studio recording, and I have a little room off to the side, and I was working on the arrangement, and she would like knock on the door and say, "How's it going?" And I'd say, "It's going," and I wouldn't play it for her. And then I finally played it for her, and she was crying, you know, and I said, "Well, let's do it," you know, and that was the end of it, you know. And then she performed it a lot, and one time she asked me to fly to California to conduct, and I said, "You don't need a conductor, it's only a string quartet," you know. She said, "I want you to fly," and I don't like flying, even though I flew to Germany for this. And so I didn't fly, and I don't remember what it was for some big event out in California, but she's used it on a lot of occasions. She's used it when she wants to be more intimate. You know?
I mean, this song is like such an expression of vulnerability. When you get a client, you know, obviously this is an artist that you worked closely with for a number of years, so it's a different type of relationship.
I've known Jill since she was in high school.
Yeah.
She grew up in Philadelphia, so one of the things about me being in Philadelphia is that a lot of the artists that you're going to play today all grew up in Philadelphia. So we were sort of a homegrown unit of musicians. So,
I mean, you said it's all sort of by feel, but when you're writing the arrangement, something like this, I mean, you know, you notice just as a neophyte, as a layperson who doesn't study music necessarily formally, you know, you hear just the strings follow the cadence of her singing at different points. I mean, you know, whatever counter melodies that you're sort of exploring. I guess, is that apply in this type of situation, or is it really just something that's more instinctive?
This was more instinctive. This was out of, I just wanted to add an emotional context to the song, and this was an easy song to do, even though it took me a minute to come to terms with it. You know, I don't like doing too much, you know, because I think too much takes, you know, you can go hear symphony, you know, or go listen to the cello, you know, or something. So, and it's a pop record, really. So, I don't know, I just think the mood is good.
Where in Philly did you grow up?
I grew up in a neighborhood that was pretty poor neighborhood. It's called North Philadelphia. The same neighborhood Jill grew up, the same neighborhood McFadden and Whitehead grew up, the same neighborhood Teddy Pendergrass grew up. We all, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of musicians, a lot of singers. It was my father had a store, and we lived up top of the store. In the back of the store, I used to play my cello all day long.
At what age did you start on the cello?
6. I started guitar first. There was a toy guitar in my father's store, and I brought it in the back. I learned how to tune it. It was actually an Elvis Presley guitar, which I should have kept because it's worth a lot of money today. It was one of those little toy plastic guitars, and it came with a pitchfork, and it came with a little color instruction book, how to tune the guitar, and it actually had it had a couple of songs in the back, and I taught myself how to play a few Elvis songs. And my mother took me to guitar lessons. 2 blocks away or 3 blocks away, there was a little music store in the early 50s, and the guitar teacher, after going through a few books with me, said, "You got to get him a violin. You know, he's got hands, he's got fingers, you know, he's got ears, you know." And so my mother went to school, and I was too young really to get an instrument, but they took me in this room, and I'm small, I'm petite, you know, I'm not a big man.
Petite's a good word, yeah.
Okay, I'm not a big man. So if they would have had a bass in that room, I would have taken the bass, but the biggest string instrument they had in that room was the cello. So I came home, the cello was bigger than I was at the time, and that's all.
And you stuck with this and eventually were classically trained. You got into a pretty prestigious music school,
I went
correct?
to conservatory, yeah.
Right. Which one was that?
There's a great music school in Philadelphia, and I got in very young. I started studying with the cello teacher there, and I started studying with the counterpoint teacher there, and I was accepted, I think I was around 13 years old. And I quit. I sort of stopped going to high school. I don't recommend it, but
I think some people in this room already are past that point. So
yeah, I know.
you're in good company.
But
actually.
I don't recommend stopping learning. That's what I meant. You know?
Actually, but in terms of actually stopping school, why did you quit school?
Because I fell in love with music, and I knew music was going to be my life, and I always liked to read anyway, and I figured I knew enough math. I was a little big shot. I don't know what to tell you, you know. And I started playing. So I was playing around town, just like I played here. And somebody asked for my phone number, and somebody that asked for my phone number was the contractor who contracted all the musicians in Philadelphia for the records. And in the early 60s in Philadelphia, there were some big records being made. There was Cameo on Parkway, and as you told me, Arctic,
yeah.
And there were a few other record labels that I'm not going to remember the name per se, but I started playing on records, and I fell in love with the process of making records,
right,
and singing and all that kind of stuff.
So you were already in love with pop music, though.
Completely. I told you I learned Elvis Presley songs when I was 6 years old, so yeah, I was very fond. My mother used to say that with the guitar and me singing, I could have earned a living in any bar in that neighborhood. You know, just going to play, and people would have thrown money at me, you know, so.
And what was the name of the contractor who picked you out of the crowd?
His name was Don Ronaldo, which you don't see credits much on records anymore, but if you go back to the 60s and the 70s, on the back of every record out of Philadelphia, it said Don Ronaldo Strings and Horns. And I was part of that Strings and Horns. And that Strings and Horns eventually became a group called MFSB.
What, how many pieces are composed in that string section back then?
6 violins, 2 violas, 2 cellos. And then a full complement of horns, too.
And what kind of musicians were converging to work together on these sides?
All different kinds. Some were conservatory trained, some were jazz players. It was a combination of people. Most of them were formally trained classically, though.
On the string side, you mean?
On the string side.
And then on the other side, it was mostly jazz players?
Well, they were formally trained. Everybody's formally trained a little bit, but yeah, they were all jazz players.
Yeah. And what did you notice in terms of just this? I mean, I know you've said before that you kind of learned pop music from, you know, an African American perspective because, you know, you're working on black music essentially.
Philadelphia is a black town, you know. They didn't make white records. They did. Cameo and Parkway made some white records.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. But I wasn't included. That was like Bobby Rydell and, you know, and people like that. I never cared for that end of it. I think my mother grew up listening to things that I never really identified with. A little bit I did, but not that much. I identified much more with the early records that I was listening to. I mean, like I told you, Stax Volt and the Motown records I loved. And then the opportunity in Philadelphia was for me to participate on these R&B records. Yeah. So I got into it. I learned, they taught me gospel music, they taught me everything.
So it's as black and white musicians. You told me that there was a union for the black musicians and one separate for the white musicians, correct?
In the early 60s, that's correct. You know, that's how segregated life was in Philadelphia. Yeah. It's still too segregated in a way, but there's not a black and a white musician union anymore.
So you're in the studio together with, you know, people from maybe a different neighborhood or that you haven't necessarily encountered as a teenager. You know, what else did you learn, not just musically, but just from being around this crew of people?
Well, they were less formal than my background was, and I liked that a lot. I learned how to smoke reefer with them, you know, I mean, there were so many things that I learned that I can't put in words. I just liked them. They liked me and I liked them. They liked me for my knowledge, and I liked them for their knowledge.
When did you start to encounter producers like Kenneth Gamble and Leon Huff?
I was probably a teenager. I would say maybe 16, 17 years old, the first time I saw Leon Huff. Mm-hmm. He was in the record business early on. He did Phil Spector's records. He played piano on all those great Phil Spector records out of New York, and you know, like the girl groups and all that. They used to have 3 piano players in the room at one time, and Leon was one of the piano players. Leon played rhythm piano. Then there was somebody who played melodic, and so. But I met him then, and I met Bunny Sigler then. Bunny Sigler used to sing opera, so he considered himself like a crossover. He was classical as well as R&B, but yeah, I mean, I got very involved. It was a way, first of all, it was a way I made my living too. You know, it wasn't as if I did it for nothing. You know, those early records, that first of all, it was all cash. There was no checks. It was like really sort of like not lawful, I guess is the best way to say it.
Off the books.
Say again.
Off the books.
Off the books, yeah.
Actually, there's one group that you did form, which I'm actually a little bit curious about before you got fully immersed into the soul scene.
Well, it was both. But I mean,
well, it was at the same time, simultaneous.
Same time.
Okay.
I had a bar band before this group.
Right.
And my bar band used to do covers. I played bass, electric bass. And my bar band used to do covers, but we mostly did like Sam and Dave, and we did Percy Sledge. And we did whatever we felt like doing. But we weren't the only, we were in Philadelphia doing that, but I think there's probably a band in every city in the 60s, in every city you would go to, that were doing that.
Right. Well, how did, if we can show image number 1 on the screen over here, how did this group form? Good News.
Well, Michael Bacon, who still plays music, and I had been friends since we were 11 years old. Michael played the cello, and I met him, we were both cellists in an all-city orchestra. Okay. And, you know, we were friends for years and years and years, and I think, as I told you yesterday, and I'll tell everybody here, I took way too many psychedelics, and I ended up not even knowing my name, which is not good, but this group was sort of like a healing process for me. I went away from my earlier friends, and I did this, and you know, I didn't write most of this stuff, but I played and I sang a little bit, and we went all over the world. I mean, we did the Isle of Wight Festival, we did, you know, many. It got very successful very quick. We were signed to Columbia Records. I hated the record we made. Yeah. I knew I didn't know anything about making records when we were in the studio making that record. They gave us a producer, and all he did was we just, whatever we did live, we did in the studio, and I knew that wasn't right. And I knew none of the songs would be hits because they didn't sound like the other records that were on the radio at the time.
Well, what style are we talking about? We're talking about...
It was folk music, I would say. I would classify it as more, it was the acoustic guitar and the cello. And I played bass, too. Okay. And we both sang, and that was it. And we made a lot of noise. You know, I play a lot of cellos, so, you know, I ate up a lot of space with the cello. And Michael had a good voice. Michael sounded a lot like James Taylor. To this day, he has a band with his brother Kevin Bacon, who's world famous, called the Bacon Brothers. And I don't go hear them because I don't like them, you know, so I don't know what to tell you.
Sorry, Kevin.
Yeah, sorry, Kevin. But if they were in the room, I'd say the same thing.
I think it's also interesting because, you know, you're relatively young and you're getting this major record deal. You know, as a young person, sort of dealing with, you know, music industry is different now, but that same experience might be something that people in this room encounter in terms of like being involved in something from a relatively early age that they're not ready for. What do you think? What do you think you can sort of impart as far as advice goes in dealing with a situation like that?
Well, I never listened to anybody. Like I said before, I quit school early. I mean, I was really like, I thought I was like a street kid on my own, you know, in the 60s. And I'm not recommending that. This group had an agent, had a lawyer, had a manager, had all these people that told me what to do. It drove me crazy. And at the end of the week, if we made a couple $1,000s, I'd go home with $200 or whatever it was. I don't even remember what it was. And I hated that. I hated that because, you know, I mean, it was just like, I know they made a living, and to this day, I have a manager who got me this gig. So, I mean, it's part of reality. And a lot of times, you know, when you're little, you don't think they know what they're talking about. You know, you're like, oh, I know what I'm doing, and especially if you were a hippie. You know, and involved in drugs, for sure, you didn't listen to anybody. The hippies had an expression, don't trust anybody over 30. You know, so here I was all of like 16 or 17 years old, and all these, I had a manager who was probably in his 50s, and, you know, it was not a good experience. You know, I met Clive Davis, and I met a lot of different people, a lot of different artists that I admired. My goal before this record, they kept on saying, oh, this is the next Simon and Garfunkel. You know, that's what CBS signed us. Oh, Columbia, oh, this is the next. So I said, oh, great. Well, why don't you get Paul Simon to produce the record then? So we actually had a meeting with him, but he wasn't, you know, he didn't even produce his own records. So.
Well, the producers who made a profound impact on you after you left this group, as we mentioned, Kenneth Gamble and Leon Huff. If we could show image number 2.
Well, the thing was, I had already had a taste of what the Philly records were prior to this. So when I gave this up, I knew I could go back there. I called Don Ronaldo. I said, look, can I play cello again in your group? And he said, absolutely. Are you kidding? So I started working right away, and I also knew that Gamble and Huff and Tommy Bell, these guys knew how to make records, man.
And that's Tom Bell in the center right there, Leon on the
That's
left, and,
right.
and Kenneth on the
That's
right.
a great picture. That's when we were kids.
So you're going and doing sessions. Let's play something actually that I believe you played on. It'll sound really nice in this room. This is the OJ's Backstabbers from 1972.
Leon Huff playing piano.
Leon Huff playing piano. You're a part of the string section, arranged by Tom Bell, produced by Gamble and Huff.
That's the mighty OJs. Let me tell you, man, they're still kicking. I'm going to do an album with them before the end of the year. It might be their last album. Eddie, you don't have a picture. Eddie Levert he's got to be 78 years old now, you know. And Walter's got to be in that general. I'm 70, and they're old. They're 8 to 10 years older than I am.
Do you have a memory
But
of?
I have a memory of the song, because the person who actually wrote the lyrics for that song was my good friend John Whitehead, who's not with us anymore. And he told me that he was living in what we called government housing. You call government housing maybe, but we call the projects in Philadelphia. And he came home one day, and his wife, young wife, was outside talking to people sitting on these two guys. And he went upstairs, and he got really mad. He went, and they smiled at him. And he went upstairs, and he wrote, "They smile in my face all the time. They want to take your place, the Backstabbers." And he wasn't working for Gamble and Huff at the time, but Gamble and Huff had a little office in those days. And he went in and he sang, you know, he would say, this is the way he wrote a song. He would go, "They're smiling in your face." He would come in and just sing the melody to you. And he sang the melody to Huff, and Huff started playing the piano, and it turned out to be a big hit. And turned out to be a career maker for my friends John and Gene. And that's the story I have about that.
When you're going to work every day, you're going to, I guess, Sigma Sound Studios in Philly, right? And you are a part of these sessions. I mean, we could literally sit here for hours listening to different Philadelphia soul records that you were in on the sessions for. Did you have an idea at the time that this was something really special?
I knew that was a hit. You know, it sounded, if you listen to it, if you know the history of Motown and the history of commercial black music, this sounds like a hit. And I would go in, and sometimes I would get the chills. You know, I would just sit there and listening back to, before we even put the strings or the horns on, I would just sit there and think about just how brilliant the vocals were and how brilliant the rhythm was. I mean, that's Norman Harris playing guitar, who's no longer with us, who was my dear friend. I mean, these were great musicians.
What about the arrangement of Tom Bell? I guess, I mean, you can either use this as an example.
You can barely hear the strings.
But I think when you hear the strings, though, I mean, it's like this just wave of something.
Tom Bell was I used to say he was the Black Burt Bacharach. He was the greatest young black arranger in the country at the time. And Atlantic Records knew it, as well as Columbia Records knew it. And, you know, they gave these guys carte blanche. In those days, these were street kids. They gave them whatever they wanted. They knew that they had something special in Philadelphia.
Now you mentioned Norman Harris,
Ronnie Baker,
Earl Young. These are some of the rhythm section, the backbone of a lot of these records.
The backbone of these records.
Yeah.
These guys came to work and enjoyed themselves. They smoked a reefer and they played on this song. You know, that was what they did.
How many songs in a day would you typically do?
As a rhythm section, I bet they did at least 3, 4. Tommy Bell would do even 5 or 6 a day, but it'd go a late day, you know. But it was all based on what you heard the piano do. Like in Tommy Bell's songs, you know, he was the leader. He sat there, and the guitar fit in, and the bass fit in, and the drums fit in, and they kept going and going and going. And you know, Gamble would be in the booth, and Gamble had the words, or whoever was the lyricist would, and they would all, you know, the vocalists were never there. You know, very rarely were the vocalists there when they were cutting rhythm. The vocalists came in later, and they rehearsed them, and then the strings and horns came in last. And then it was mixed.
Right. So you got a chance to see it almost to the fully formed at that point when you guys came in with the strings.
Yeah. When I heard the record, when they were putting up the mix for us to play, I heard the record. And it was always, I mean, sometimes it was shitty, but most of the time it was brilliant. So I don't know what to tell you.
What do you think you learned from some of the other arrangers you worked under? Because you referred to these guys, Tom Bell, Norman Harris,
Ronnie Baker arranged.
Bobby
Bobby Martin.
These are your mentors.
Oh, they are my mentors. Jack Faith, you can't leave Jack Faith. Yeah, I mean, Tommy Bell was the first one, as I told you yesterday. He came in one day and Gamble was hiring one arranger and Tommy Bell said, I bet Larry can do better than him. And I never arranged for them and Gamble said, okay, well, let's give him a try. And that's how I met McFadden and Whitehead, or at least that's how I started to work for McFadden and Whitehead. Yeah, and that was that. It was that simple.
You mentioned MFSB.
But it was all based on my being in Philadelphia at the right time, the right place, with the right people, the right singers. This is what makes a hit record, I mean, all of those elements fall together in one moment, and you get a record that lasts. This record is 45 years old that we just played. It's amazing, guys.
Let's show image number 3. This is Larry in the studio back in the day with the string section.
Holy mackerel. There I am. This is unusual. They had 3 cellos and a bass. Yeah. But this was my good friend, Romeo Di Stefano. He met me when I was like 13 years old, and he would get me gigs, and he would pick me up because I didn't drive. He would say, oh, yeah, and he would just pick me up, and I don't know. I can't speak enough. I can't say enough good things about some of these older people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, MFSB.
You got to understand, I was a great player, though, and I was a great musician.
We know this,
and
yes.
and they loved me, I mean, so, I was like a lollipop that they showed off to people, I mean.
Well, you were the young guy, too, right?
I was not only the young guy, but Ronaldo used to say to them, you could never play better than him in your whole life, So.
Now, MFSB, you mentioned, is this collective of musicians. Well,
it was mother, father, sisters, brothers, which made it La Family, but it was also motherfucking son of a bitch, so, which made it real Philly. So that was the deal. And it was a studio band, a studio orchestra. Now, Philadelphia wasn't the only orchestra like that. There was, we talked before. There was a Chicago group, and there was a group in L.A., and there was a group in New York. But yeah, we were a collective of musicians.
Let's show image number 4, actually, just so we have an idea of who's around here. This is outside of Sigma.
I didn't show up that picture. I think I was a little too high.
Yeah, you missed the photo shoot.
That's Dom Ronaldo in the front with the big smile on. And that's Larry Washington, the great conga player who leads off in that song. Mm-hmm. And that's Bobby Martin behind Dom Ronaldo. Mm-hmm. And that's Richie Jones back there in the afro. He just died this last week. Most of these people are not living anymore.
Now, was it frustrating at any point to be kind of in the background as this sort of faceless group of musicians?
Yeah, it was very frustrating. That's why I started arranging. Yeah. I mean, we started with I was already a big star before big star. Good news, I was doing real well, but I didn't like it. Yeah. So, and I wasn't going to put myself in a position where every day I didn't want to go out and play. And then, traveling, if you're a traveling musician, it's like the worst kind of life. Somehow, these young kids today, they love it, I don't know what to tell you. I hated traveling. Yeah.
Well, we're glad you made it here, at least.
I made it here. That was an amazing event that I made it here.
When you started arranging, it actually coincided with this so-called disco backlash, which, Gamble and Huff, the Philly sound, had become quite closely associated with, even though I think that's also kind of a reductive way to talk about Gamble and Huff. They were much more than that. But
more than that.
But they were swept up in this. What was it like to go through that?
Well, I finally started arranging, and then all of a sudden, Disco Sucks came around, so the whole sound of Philadelphia got put on a back burner because, it was a reaction. Well, there was a lot of bad disco music, just like there's a lot of bad music around all the time, and it seemed like people blamed the Philly sound, and the Philly sound, as I told you, my living, all of a sudden I was making 1/10 of what I was making. And I had started arranging, and the arranging got put on the back burner for a while, and I told you I was fortunate enough to I met somebody from Sesame Street, and they found out who I was, and they listened to me.
Children's show, Sesame Street.
Children's show. And I started writing songs for Sesame Street with a lot of the black artists that I grew up with in Philadelphia.
But that's survival, That's survival. That's working to survive.
It was better than survival. I enjoyed it. And as a matter of fact, I started doing it before the Sound of Philly ended, because when I used to go to the studio, I would go in and Gamble said, "What'd you write for Sesame Street?" Because he loved Sesame Street. And Tommy Bell said, "Can I get a job?" I said, "What are you asking me, can you get a job?" But that was basically, they already knew that I was headed in working for children's television at that time.
So what motivated you some years later to open your own studio in Philly?
Well, you're taking a big gap.
I am taking a big leap because
Okay.
I need to condense a little bit.
Gamble always had me working through the 80s. And as a matter of fact, the 80s, I bought a synclavier, which is a sampling like what you guys use, except it was one of the predecessors of what you use. And it actually had, back in 1983, it had 2 minutes worth of memory. And I could record a whole song in this box, background vocals, everything that I needed. And I actually started producing more those days. And mostly how I got into it was producing. In the 80s, there was a wave. The R&B wave ended up being a lot of teenage groups. New Edition was one of the most famous ones of but there were a lot of other. There was one in Philadelphia called the Whitehead Brothers. And they were John Whitehead, my dear friend who wrote Backstabber's Sons. And Gamble had me in the studio at night working on an album with him, and they were like 13 years old. And so I started working on an album with them, and eventually that album never came out. But I was at Sigma, and I was learning how to engineer. I was learning other trades. I always had a little bit of knowledge, but I was not hands-on, but I became hands-on. And the culmination of this story was I did a lot of teenage R&B during that time, and it ended up with the Whitehead Brothers had a big hit record. I think you know the year better than I do. I'm not going to remember the year, but I think it was almost 1990 or something like that. And from that point, from the Whitehead Brothers, I started meeting, and a little bit before the Whitehead Brothers, we got involved with Pop Art Records, which was one of the first early hip-hop labels in the United States. They had Fresh Prince and Jazzy Jeff. They had LL Cool J. They had Salt and Pepper. They had, I don't even remember how many different acts they had.
Steady B, who was from Philly, Roxanne Shante.
Roxanne Shante. They had Cooley C, who ended up in jail, and
Cool
Steady
C.
B too. Yeah, they had a lot of records. So I ended up helping Lawrence Goodman, who owned Pop Art. I didn't produce those records, but I helped him with the music because he wasn't making any money from the samples. He was giving that money away back to the people who he borrowed from, the samples. So what he would do, as I told you yesterday, he'd come in and play us a record and say, "Can you make something that's similar in feel?" And and we did. And it was a cash job, no names involved, and he would give us a G or whatever it was in those days, for the record, and I got to meet all those young people then. And then after the Whitehead Brothers was a big hit, all those people entered my life again. because I had a little studio. I moved from Sigma. Sigma almost went bankrupt. And I moved from Sigma to another studio, and I had a little room there, and everyone just started showing up. I told you Rodney Jerkins showed up, and Jazzy Jeff, who's Jeff, he's not Jazzy, but Jeff showed up, and a lot of people showed up. The beginnings of a group called the Jazzy Fat Nasties showed up, which were one of the products that the Roots produced. So I started meeting a lot of by that time, let's see, how old was I? I must have been in my 30s, like getting to be my late 30s. And I felt like there was going to be a renaissance of Philadelphia. And I knew it was going to include some live, and there was some live play. Michael Jackson ruled the waves in the 80s. His records, Quincy Jones was a genius, and those records, they ruled the waves. But Jodeci was all live music, and some of these other records that were coming out was they were guitar players and bass players and maybe drum machine. And I thought to myself, well, this is the way I was going to make the Whitehead Brothers record. That was first off. Yeah. And including, there was a song on the Whitehead Brothers record called Beautiful Black Princess that was just piano and voice, and I put strings on, and people loved it. And I decided, I didn't like the studio, I didn't like the owner of the studio I was there, and so I thought, okay, I don't have a lot of money, but whatever money I have, I'm going to try to find a place, and I'm going to build a room that I want to build, and it's going to be more of a hip-hop R&B kind of a room. So it got to the point where the room was so loud, you could turn the volume up so much your ears could bleed, but the kids loved it. That was more important. Loud was more important than good, even though it was good. But loud was very important. The first thing these young producers would do, they come in and the knob was there, and they turn it right to 10, no matter what record was on. So, and that studio got to be very successful.
And Rodney Jerkins was one of the young producers that came to that studio?
He was one of the young producers who came around. As a matter of fact, the first year we were open, or no, maybe it was the second year. Again, maybe I did too much drugs because I don't remember years and things like that at varying different
It's okay,
things.
we have the internet for that. So.
Right, well, the boy's mind was, the record was made, the vocals weren't done in my room, but the record was made in the studio.
And you did the strings for this record,
I did the
correct?
strings.
So let's listen to Brandy and Monica, produced by Rodney Jerkins. The Boy Is Mine, 1998, strings by Larry Gold.
This was Rodney's first hit. It was #1 for 16 weeks in America, which was extraordinary. Only, I think, Elvis Presley was #1 longer. But for a kid who's 16 years old, what a day.
Yeah, not bad. The harp thing is like
Sampled.
I thought he played it. It's not. Is it him playing that figure?
Right.
It's the thing that's really driving this. You're kind of filling in.
The melody on this was like, to me it was like.
Speak into the mic, please.
Sorry. The melody on this was like. It's like a theme, It's like a Godfather theme or something. Da da dee da 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 dum. It was like very Italian, and I thought it was really cool because the harp was classical, obviously, and I thought it was cool driving it against Brandy and Monica singing the way and the bass, boom, 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 including with the breakdown. You barely hear it, but the cello's going boom, boom, boom. It always ends up that strings are mixed so low,
They are
It always
mixed.
bothers me, but it's not a string record, so I don't know what I'm saying,
What do you think you learned from, besides, the exuberance and the energy of the younger producers and artists that you were working with? Because this is really this chapter in your career where you're working with people of a different generation. What do you think you learned from them?
I think it was both. They learned from me and I learned from them, They just had a love for it. And, when you have a love for music, that's something you share in common. It's as when we were talking about my earlier career, and they had the love, and they were young and exuberant and stayed up all night. I would go in the morning and I would go in the studio 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning to work on arranging, and they'd be there from the night before, all crashed on the couches, and the music was so loud you could hear it down the block. And I knew, I tell people that was the first time I really knew I had a studio, when I used to go in and see people sleeping there and had been there all night, because that's how much they loved it.
How would you describe the producer-arranger relationship?
Well, with Rodney, I'd known him since he was 13. So that was a special relationship. He called me, he had nicknames for me, and it
Like
was
what?
special.
Like
Lair Man was one of them, Philly Dude. I don't even remember, I represented the history of Philly music to him, though, being in the room at the same time. He would always ask, what do you think? What do you, and I was free with my opinions. It was my studio, So I was definitely free with my opinion. Rodney was the first of many young producers. But Rodney brought the roots to my studio, because when this record was so big, Amir, Questlove, he wanted a little bit of that. So they showed up, and James Poyser, who's another great young producer at the time, showed up, and I started building other little rooms to accommodate everybody, that they had their own little studio. Just like I see this place has all these little rooms, and so my studio was, well, this was 98. So from 98 on, I started building these little rooms. And to the point where I don't own the studio anymore. Some other people own the studio, but Amir still has a studio there. The Roots still have a studio there, even though they're in New York all the time. Amir has a record collection there of, his record collection's still at the studio. It just, the young producers were, and then they introduced me to so many other people. As I told you before, Amir was so happy to be there and to be part of it, that all of a sudden, I would, he would share me with whoever he could share me with. And I felt really blessed that I had such good young friends, to be perfectly honest with you.
That Philly neo-soul roots hip-hop scene from that era is, for a lot of people, I would imagine, some of the people in this room, that's like the Gamble and Huff era to a prior generation. That represents like a really classic era.
Well, the Roots' first album they did in my studio was Things Fall Apart. And there's interludes that I participated in. There's an interlude called, I'm not going to remember all these titles, but Love of My Life. Love of My Life. There was I remember the melody, that I came up with, and they went crazy. And then I did a bunch of other arranging for that record, a little bit here and a little bit there. You Got Me has strings on it.
Very subtle, though. It's
very subtle.
It's tough to hear.
Yeah, it's very subtle, and it was mixed too low. Bob Powers. Don't want to mention any names, but
sorry,
yeah,
Bob.
Yeah. It could have been mixed louder. That's all I'm saying.
But do you think also this is to actually mix the strings higher for that era is kind of a bold move too? Because
I think they were afraid. Look at Rodney's record. Look how low the strings are there. I think that they were afraid that I was going to whitewash hip hop, or something. I don't even know, or clean it up, or I really don't know. But what happened was, within a few years, I had at my studio Timberland, I had Pharrell, I had, I can't even remember all the names that came through, but the studio became a hotbed of what was creatively happening at that time. I did Jill's first record, where the strings you can hear.
Right.
It was just a great time. And we had a club. There was a club that featured, so every Tuesday night, it was like an open, I had electric cello. I used to come and play. See, that was the little bit of playing I did, and they loved it, and Jill would get up and improvise, and everybody, and Amir would show up, and Tariq would get up, It was fun. It was called the Hot Club, I guess, in Philly. It burned down. It was so hot.
You mentioned Timberland. Maybe we should play something that he produced that you did string arrangements for. This song is entitled "Cry Me a River." It is by a singer you may have heard of named Justin Timberlake. 2002, strings by Larry Gold.
Timberland came to visit at the studio and stayed for like a month and a half. He was only going to come for like a night. He had a bus outside. We had a studio in the back and a bed, but a studio in the back on the bus. And he came up, and we were having a party. It was around Christmas. It was like December. And he fell in love with the whole situation there. And he ended up staying for like 6 weeks. And then he probably went to another city and did the same thing. You know, I don't know what to say. But he would come back. I mean, I did Justin's first few records. And they came back. They even flew back. One time, Justin flew back with Cameron Diaz, was his girlfriend. And she came to the session. That was sort of an interesting evening. But I think we did What Goes Around that session. But yeah, I don't know what to say.
When you are given this material,
I think
what's
I think I did this one almost on the spot.
Okay, yeah. What's that situation like?
I mean, I think I did this one in an hour or two prior to even doing it. It's very simple. And
it is simple,
yeah,
but
yeah.
the simplicity
and it's just
of it
a string
is what's
quartet,
good.
and I think I'm playing on this. I don't even think I hired a cello player. So, you know, it was just a simple. You know, again, it's so hip hop, and Timberland, you know, doing all his mouth noises, and I don't even know all of that. You know, and I just didn't want to get in the way of that. But there was, as the end of the record goes on, the strings again give you a little bit more emotional feel to him crying "Cry Me a River."
Do you have a preference in terms of material that you get? I mean, this is like you're providing you're a craftsperson providing a service on some level, but also it's a creative endeavor. I mean, do you feel like when you get a piece of material that some of the songs we played are emotional, they are songs about heartbreak, about disappointment, disillusionment. These things seem to go very well with some of your string arrangements. Is there a preference for you when you actually get the material in terms of subject matter, in terms of what it is?
There's no real preference. I like to have at least a week to think about it. I don't like doing it on the spot. But, you know, to people like Timberland, they want it done then, you know. Oh, come on up with 4 musicians and, you know, and bring 4 musicians in and we'll just sit around and you just write something, you know. I mean, so I did. That happened on more than one occasion. Like, I don't like saying that I can do it overnight or in one day or something like that because first of all, I don't like having that kind of pressure. But like Flashing Lights I did in one evening. You know, so next day I recorded it. And Kanye just sent it to me. I think Kanye tried an arranger in California and he didn't like what they did on that album. And I think what happened was someone mentioned my name to him and he just sent it to me and he said, "Can you get it to me tomorrow? I'm mixing it." You know, and I said, "What do you mean get it to you tomorrow?" You know, I mean, and he said, "And I want a big string intro." You know, I said, "Okay, well, give me one day and I'll record it the next day." And I think there were 2 or 3 songs that I did on that record.
Right, the graduation record.
You're right.
So then you're pulling it together at the last minute. Do you have go-to people that you
I have a string section that
yeah.
I've used. As a matter of fact, one or two of the string players I've known since the 80s. And the rest are young people, you know, from the schools and you know, and I'm always trying different people but yeah, I have a group of people that I use all the time.
But that's, you know, in terms of like Kanye or any producer giving you a direction, I guess that's enough, right? I mean, I want a big string intro.
He didn't even give me a direction. He just said, I want a string intro on Flashing Lights, and That's all he said. And then he sent me those other songs, and I just did whatever I wanted to do. And then I sent it to him, and he loved it. So that was the end of that.
And he
To the point, I think I did the next record, 808s and a Heartbeat, with him, and I think I did the one after that. And then I even did another when he proposed to Kim. He rented out. I think he rented out where the San Francisco Giants play. He rented out the ballpark, and he had an orchestra, and he proposed to Kim. Kim's favorite song at the time was "Born to Die," and I did a string arrangement of "Born to Die." I did the string arrangement on "Born to Die," but I did a string version completely of "Born to Die."
For the proposal.
For the proposal. And that was, There was a 60-piece orchestra, just him on his knees, no one in the audience. There are pictures. You can go to the internet. I'm sure you can find it. Wow. And I didn't go. He didn't invite me to come and conduct.
You didn't get an invitation to the proposal?
Nah,
and you did the string arrangement?
I sent the arrangement.
That's got to be disappointing.
It was bizarre enough that I would have probably gone, but I didn't go.
Well, the arrangement on Flashing Lights is wonderful, and I think we should listen to it. So let's listen to Kanye West featuring Dwelle, Flashing Lights.
And Jill Scott.
And Jill Scott, 2007, strings by Larry Gold.
Got comfortable there.
Is it a different approach when you're doing something that's strictly drum machine, hip hop?
You notice I came up with a little theme that I sample sort of, even though I played it through. But there's if you go through that arrangement, I'm leaning very heavily on 4 or 5 notes, and I keep featuring those 4 or 5 notes, which in a way simplifies the arrangement. There's not a lot of playing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, but I can't even imagine this song without those strings.
That's a great arrangement. See,
it is a great.
That's a great arrangement. And if you play just the strings, it's a pretty good arrangement. This one, and it's mixed well. Yes. I don't know who mixed it, but kudos to the mixer.
When you're working, I guess when you're working in the pop realm, you mentioned Lana Del Rey, and you've worked with...
Well, Lana Del Rey, my hookup was Emile Haney. I told you that.
Right.
Who comes from hip-hop.
Right. Well, that's actually the other interesting thing is your career, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, it's all overlapped in a really organic way. People could look and say, okay, Gamble and Huff, neo-soul period, 2010s era, pop music, and maybe see them as disparate groupings, but there is an overlap. The people who made these records also made these records and brought you in, which I think is an important thing to, keep in mind. It's easy to sort of stand back and look at something as being, this is a genre, this is a genre, this is an era. But it's really the outgrowth of different communities.
Yeah, I think you're right. And my approach is always, I'm just adding Larry Gold at this point, which is part Gamble, part Huff, part Bell, part classical music, part, there's so many different parts that I don't break myself down. It's music, the bottom line is I adore music.
And as far as technology and how you embrace it,
well, I tried to keep up as best as I could, but it left me behind a little bit. I don't really, I work with my old computer, the synclavier still, and I still use a lot of pencil, and I still write an awful lot. And I have a young man that comes in, he's not so young anymore, but he copies it into the computer, and then he shows it to me on the computer, and I tell him what I want to change, and And basically, I guess he's my copyist. And I always had a copyist, but originally the copyist would work from my written score. And now they work from either a tonal score or my written score or a computer score. You know, I mean, those things changed over the course of my lifetime.
You've chosen to stay in Philadelphia as well.
Yes. My wife has taught school in Philadelphia. I've raised a daughter in Philadelphia, and maybe I should have moved at one point, but I lost that point. You know? And I opened the studio, and the studio consumed, I guess I opened the studio around in 96 or something like that, 95, and it consumed my life until probably I sold it about maybe 7 years ago, so until 2011, I was involved on a day-to-day basis. And by the time 2011 rolled around, maybe we should have moved to California, but you know, maybe shoulda, coulda, woulda. I was getting so much work just coming in over the phone and them sending me songs, and the internet was playing up so much. I mean, to the point where if someone wants to hear what I'm doing, you know, we can have Skype, and I can sit there and, you know, play it for them or have it, you know, or send them. I don't like sending demos. I'd much rather play it for somebody on the phone and talk to them about it, you know, prior to bringing in live instruments.
You gave us, actually, you brought something which is an actual score of some of your work. This is for a track by the singer Neo. And you actually also brought a different rough mix of the song entitled Queen.
I don't even know whether this song ever came out. It was on a movie.
It came out on some sort of a soundtrack, I think.
Okay.
Birth of a Nation, I believe.
Right, that movie bombed
soundtrack.
right away.
The song is still good, though.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we might show image number 5, which is the score. Actually, no, I'm sorry. That's image number 5.
Holy moly.
Image number 6, actually. That's MFSB.
So this is what this score looks like. And you'll hear this is another one that's just piano and Neo.
And it's a rough mix, so we can hear the strings nice and clear.
Right.
So why don't we listen to it, and then I guess, let me see, what's the best way to do this? You guys have the timestamp? Yeah, you good? You sure now? All right. So we're going to play this, and then we'll sort of, if you want to, you can kind of follow along as we get to the different points in the song. These guys are going to turn the page. So this is Neo, the rough mix of Queen, featuring strings by Larry Gold. What do you want to say about this in terms of?
Well, I like low strings. I like strings that provide, I'm a cellist. The cello is low compared to the violin, which is high. So even my violin writing a lot of the times is, more within the, realm of the lower register. Not the lower register per se of the violin, but lower register. And it adds a warmth to it. To me, on a track like this, the piano provides enough top. And again, I'm just following Neo, really, basically. I'm just trying to not get in his way. And every once in a while, when he stops singing, I move a little bit more. And that's sort of been my habit since I've been younger doing this, is I'm really aware of the vocalist and not really stepping on their toes. And I like this song. I thought it was a very well-written song.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful. You're 70 years old, as you mentioned. What haven't you done that you still would like to do?
Well, I mean, yeah, I could name a zillion things that I'd like to do, but whether life will let me do those things or not, I've never done movies per se. I would love to do a little bit, just to see. I'd love to work with some people, that I like collaborating, and I don't get the chance anymore because everyone moved out of Philadelphia. I'm sort of left by myself a lot of. the Roots moved, and Jill moved, and everybody moved. And you know, in life, you know, when you move to another area, you build new friendships and new things. So in one way, I feel like I've been left aside, and at certain times I feel that way. But I'm also fucking 70 years old, you know, so I mean, give me a break here, you know. I mean, most 70-year-olds don't even get out of bed, you know, so what they do. But I don't know what I expect, you know. I think my expectations since I was a little boy have been way too high, but that's what drives me, you know.
We're going to open it up to questions in just a moment, but the sort of last question I want to ask you is, you know, when you talk about strings bringing a depth of feeling to a piece of music, it's of course the sound of the strings, you know, themselves, but the instruments don't play themselves, and the arrangements don't write themselves. These are from people. So what do you think it is within you as a person that brings out this depth of feeling? Where does your depth of feeling come from?
I'm a pretty emotional dude. I just, you know, I could cry in a minute notice, you know. I mean, that's the way I've been since I was little, you know. So the cello has always represented sadness to me, you know. I mean, I used to, when my daughter was little and we would watch movies or TV together, as soon as I heard the cello, I said, uh-oh, someone's gonna die or someone's gonna get sick, you know. And she was like maybe 4 years old, and by the time she was 6 years old, she heard the cello go, uh-oh. You know, so, you know, it's a mournful instrument. You know, one of the great you know, I don't know what to tell you. It can also be a joyful instrument. You know, I'm not gonna say it can't be, but, you know, like you said before, most of the time when people hire me to do an arrangement, the song's usually about someone breaking up or someone's got fucked up somehow, you know. So the strings sort of play right into that situation. But I also I pride myself on still being a hippie, and still have an open mind and being loose about my life, even though it's pretty formal and tight. Don't know what to say. You know?
Well, we can't.
And I feel, but I do feel honored and blessed that I've had such a long, fruitful career.
Well, we feel honored and blessed that you've been here with us today. So let's say thanks once again to Larry Gold.
Thank you. You're too kind. I'm going to get verklempt.
All right, so anybody have questions? We have a microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
How can you describe the main role of the strings in the songs that you arrange for? Like, what is the main goal the strings try to, you know?
Bring out the feelings and the emotion, like I said. Like on a song like Cry Me a River, you know, as simple as it is, you know, he's talking about a breakup, you know. So I try to add a little bit of emotional depth, you know, in the same way when you, like we were just saying, in a movie, when you hear the music come in, you know, depending on the kind of movie it is, you know, I mean, it adds another element to it. I think the early days of string writing in popular music was, you know, it was more based on the melody and more based on like, you know, like there was an old Philly trick that when you weren't sure what you were going to write on those old songs, you just copied the melody. You just went with the unified theme of that record. I still do that a lot, you know, but I don't just, I use a lot of chords, you know, this chord, you know, like it's a quartet or like it's, you know, chordal work. And I think that earlier on in my career, I did a lot of like solo work, like little lines that would go with not so many chords, but it's hard for me to describe. It's just that every song is different. And that's what made it such a nice life so far. I mean, I get to share my talent with their talent, and I get paid. Well.
Anyone else with a question?
Hey, Larry. So you mentioned that the development of technology and stuff changed your workflow in terms of like going from pen and then into.
Say again. I'm sorry.
So you mentioned about how technology has developed and how that's changed your workflow. I was wondering.
It's changed the record business. You make records on computers these days.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. So now with so many with huge advancements in terms of like sample packs and the availability of like kind of decent sounding strings to most people, has that affected you in terms of the work you get and what you're writing for and the quality of string writing in a lot of music that you don't have a part of?
I think it's simplified everything a little bit because and I think I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's simplified everything. So many young people now, you have a string sound and they write their strings. For a period of time when all that was just invented, the first thing the young producer would say to me, "Did you listen to my strings?" And I said, "Sure, I wrote them out." That was the first thing I did was write out your strings. "Oh, please use my melody." And I said, "I will use your melody. I will try to enhance your melody." I mean, I try to be respectful because they worked on the record. They were at their home or the bedroom or whatever in the studio, and they were the ones who did the record. So I am trying to be a little respectful. But sure, it's changed everything. I'd rather have a blank canvas. Then whatever I do is easy.
And do you find yourself writing for situations that aren't going to be played live, like arrangements for like string sample instruments and stuff like that?
Say I didn't understand.
Sorry, do you find yourself getting work which is not going to be recorded live, and do you have an aversion to that?
Very seldom. I do that sometimes, but very, very seldom. My whole reputation is based on records. But I have done that. I mean, I've done that for people that I know and people that I don't know, but not too often. People don't really call me for that kind of stuff. Everyone's sort of pigeonholed in life, aren't they? Really, we all get. If you had a hit record that was like techno, and you wanted to make a live record after that, everybody would say, "Oh, I don't know about that." I mean, it's hard to right. It's like everyone pigeonholes everybody in life. I think whether you're a doctor or a cellist, it doesn't. You have your specialty, and I guess I'd love to do more different kinds of work, but if you don't get the calls, how are you going to do it? So mostly it's records.
Anyone else with a question?
Hello. First of all, thank you for being here with us today and sharing your experience. I wanted to ask a question. As I play and sing with an orchestra in Moscow, I was doing it for quite a long time now, and I noticed that this music is just like these days not getting into the ears of people, not getting inside. Like nobody really likes it anymore. I just feel it.
Well, is that the question?
Yeah, sorry, okay. And you notice that putting a cello or violin into the record, it's like bringing up emotions, and it seems to me like people don't really like to being involved into someone's emotions. It's like seeing someone is naked and they say like, "Oh, he's naked. I don't want to see it." Yeah, and it's something like that. Do you kind of feel it the same way?
Well, I think that strings on records are less and less right now. So I don't know. I can't speak for your generation or the generation that's going to come after, But I think technology changes everything. And I think right now this young man talked about, it's great that you have the opportunity to sing live with an orchestra. That's thrilling. I wish more people would appreciate orchestral music and music, all different kinds of music. But, people in our lives, we do get pigeonholed. We do decide. I hope I answered your question a little bit, but I don't think people are afraid of the emotion, though. If I take the last generation that I worked with, like a Jill Scott and people, she's not afraid of feelings. I don't know. I don't think Lana Del Rey was afraid of feelings either. I think they wanted that. I don't know, though. I don't know what's going to be in the future as far as, I've done some orchestral work, and it tends to get washed away, a little bit, if that makes any sense to you. It gets to be too much for the younger generation. It seems to me it's much more interesting. Like I was watching television the other night in Berlin, and somebody was singing with a quartet, and it was pretty good. It seems to me that if it was an orchestra, it would have been too much of a wash. Where the string quartet made it more intimate. All the players were into it, you could tell, and I don't know.
I'm sorry, that may be a little bit boring question, but do you at times not record the strings you write yourself?
I mostly play.
Okay.
Like I could pick my cello up and just play, and not any people, just out of my head, So, it's interesting. I've had a life where people have hired me all the time to do what I do, and when they stop hiring me, maybe I should write all my ideas and expand them, and I probably will. But I really haven't had that much time to be able to have that leisure to do that.
Yeah, and are there times when there are other engineers recording the stuff you are writing, and when that happens, do you have a certain sound in mind before, and you kind of tell them how to mic the strings or process them, that sort of stuff?
I've had the same engineer now for 20 years, 25 years. He knows what I like. And if I don't like, we get into the studio, we have the strings there, and I start listening in the earphones. And if the mic sounds too far away, I say, bring the mics in tighter. I don't hear enough cello presence on the cello. The viola part needs to be more, come out more. Either you're going to play a little louder or move the mic closer. Part of the thing about the old Philly sound was it was very tight mic'd. Now, most everybody likes miking far away. So that's part of the wash that you hear, and you don't hear the distinctness of, I like hearing that distinctive. I've had the cello in my ear my whole life, so I like that. I like, I guess, what you would call tight miking. But I've used the same people for years and years and years, and you get used to it. It's like your bed. You just expect what you expect. And I mostly do soul records, so there's a certain sound that I think that over the course of my lifetime I'm going for, and I'm always trying to get to that spot, both engineering-wise and musically.
I was wondering, for most of us, hiring an orchestra is probably not within our budget. So do you have kind of a recommended go-to configuration or ensemble for getting a full sound with no money?
Well, when you say no money, there's always a little bit of money because I don't like using musicians and don't pay them. You know, I can't do that. But, you know, I mean, like Crimea River was probably like just 4 to 6 instruments. You know, some of these songs are 15 instruments, but you know the budget can do that. You know, but no, usually you can do something pretty good if it's with like 4 violins, you know, or 3 violins, you know, a smaller kind of a group. I mean, the Neo song probably was only like 4 violins, 2 violas, and 2 cellos. Usually I use 6 violins, 2 violas, and 2 cellos. That's what I use, 10 players. And a lot of times, if I want it to sound bigger, I'll move the mics on the second take. So like, if I have one set of strings that are tight mic'd, then the next, I'll do another version of the same thing where I move the mics a little bit. And it gets a different sound, and then I blend the two together. So by doubling them, all of a sudden I have 20 string players. And there's sometimes I'll even do it 3 times, so then I have 30 string players, because I want it to sound more like an orchestra. But nobody can afford an orchestra anymore. I mean, Kanye can, you know, out of his pocket from his clothing company. You know, I remember when these kids in the hip hop, you know, in the late 90s, we were sitting in my studio once, and one of the Roots said to me, somebody just came out with a new sneak, and it sold out the first day. And I think it was Jay-Z. And it sold out the first day, and someone looked over and said, oh, dude made $20 million today. And I looked at him and I said, you're kidding me. I mean, I had no idea that clothing was going to be, you know, but it seems that's the way in the last 20 years, they make more money from clothing than they do their records. So, and I guess that's what they call branding. I was never into branding. I'm just a simple cello player. But nobody can hire an orchestra anymore. You know, and even when I say, oh, I want to use 10 string players, oh, it's too expensive. So I even get shit for it. So I don't know what to say. Mm-hmm.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been so interesting. I wonder, when you get a song that you're going to put strings on, and like, what's the first thing you do when you get that?
I write out the chords. I write out the bass line. Depending on the record, I listen 100 times to the melody. I get to know the song to the point where I can hear it all in my head. So that when I go home at night, sometimes I think about the string lines while I'm sitting there or while I'm sleeping. You know, I wake up in the morning or when I go for a long walk, all of a sudden the song comes to me, and I'm hearing the way that things are going to work within the context of the song. So music is memory. You know, everyone should understand that music is memory. You remember a pitch, you remember a piece, you remember this, it's all memory. So that's the first thing I do, is I sort of memorize what I'm going to be working on.
So do you usually play the arrangement in some way at first, or do you think of it and then write it down, or do you play it on the cello, or do you play it on the piano?
I never
like
played on the cello.
No?
I told you, for 25 years I didn't even take my cello out of the case, basically. No, I have samples. I have string samples that I use, that I play, once I start formulating my ideas, I put it into my old synclavier. I put the ideas into my old synclavier, and I sit around and I put it on repeat, and I sit on my couch and I listen. You know, I start changing things back and forth. Or I put the arrangement up on the computer so I can see, like you saw, and I start moving things around. Oh, that's too much here. This is the...
Thanks.
Hello.
Hello.
You mentioned earlier you spend a lot of time with your instrument. I was just wondering, how do you keep practice time interesting?
How do I keep what?
Practicing or time with your instrument. How do you keep it interesting without getting bored? And what's your practice routine like?
Well, in the last 2 years, I picked my cello up again, seriously. And so I was like rebuilding. My hands were sore. I mean, I couldn't play. I have no calluses, and I promised myself I would play very slowly, and I would not force myself into situations where I would sound shitty, and I just very painstakingly play, and I don't get bored because it's my life. It's my breath in my life. So I really don't get bored of it. And I progress slowly. I just like you do when you're a child learning an instrument. You learn how to play the open strings, and then you learn how to play. So I made myself go. There's a famous old movie called I think Bill Murray, and he used baby steps. He called it. Well, baby, I do baby steps. I think music is baby steps. When I build an arrangement, it's baby steps. I start here, and then I move to this part, and I do this, or I do this. Very seldom do I do the whole thing all in one shot. I like giving myself, whether it be writing or playing, I like giving myself a little bit of time to develop it.
Is it okay? You mentioned you haven't touched your cello in 2 years. How did it feel to not be able to play or to not have time to play your instrument that gives you joy?
Well, I was trying to make a life for myself in my old age, and I didn't think I would go back to playing the cello, and I knew it would have to do with records. So I really didn't mind giving up my cello for those years. But I still did music every day. I mean, there was years there when I arranged vocals, when there were 3 or 4 young vocalists in the room, and that's like writing strings, it's similar, and it's all a learning experience. And again, I talked about baby steps. I think one of the things about making a record is you have to be able to imagine yourself, playing, like with you and your computers, you're playing the bass, or you're doing the drums, or you're doing a violin, or, so you have to get into it and use your imagination, but I think it's baby steps.
So guys, I think we're going to wrap it. Larry is going to be around this evening in the studio. So if you have any more questions that you think of, you can always hit him up. He's going to be hanging around for the rest of the afternoon. And he's just as entertaining off the couch as he is on. So it's a wonderful opportunity to just talk to him. But I can't thank you enough again for being here.
I can't thank you guys enough. Thank you.